Before we get into this video, I would just like to remind you of the Beginner's Guide to Photography, a little workshop that me and We Are Photo put together. It's a video guide. It goes through the exposure triangle and gets you out of auto mode and into manual mode so you can take control of your creativity. And furthermore, there's actually a 50% off sale currently in the month of July in 2024. It's only running to the end of the month, so get yourself 50% off in the description below. There will be a link. Check it out, let me know what you think, and on with the video. Hey, I'm Gav from Gav Takes Photos, and today we're going to be looking at the Canon 6D Mark II. Today's review is going to be slightly different to how I normally do my reviews. I'm going to see how you guys feel about it, so once you finish the video, let me know in the comment section below if you prefer this style of review, or whether you prefer my other style of review, which is just an ordinary walk and talk to the camera. So, without further ado, let's get into it. The 6D Mark II. The Canon 6D Mark II. Now, when this camera was first released, it wasn't everyone's favourite, and it received a lot of hate and a lot of controversy around certain choices Canon made. So in this video, we're going to look at the camera and see if I think Canon was justified or whether it really is a bad camera. Now, the 6D Mark II was released in 2017, which actually poses as one of its main problems. See, the Canon 80D was released in 2016, and also the Canon 5D Mark IV was also similarly released in 2016. The problem here was that the Canon 6D Mark II was using an older sensor technology, which had a lower dynamic range than both the Canon 80D, which is a crop sensor, and the Canon 5D Mark IV. And this obviously upset quite a few people. How can you release a camera a year later that's actually worse off than last year's APS-C release? It didn't really make much sense. And even though this was the first full-frame Canon camera with a flippy-dippy touchscreen, it didn't support things like 4K or any really high bitrate 1080p. So for video shooters, it wasn't that good either. So you had the photographers and the video shooters both looking at this camera going, but why? For the average YouTube vlogger though, this was a good deal. The 1080p is usable, and the autofocus is actually really reliable. But you still saw people throwing up a lot of issues with the fact that it didn't shoot log. And no matter how much they searched for the settings, there were just no logs here, no logs there, and there was no log anywhere to be found on the camera. And that really upset people. Very sad. But here's the deal though. This was never meant to be a professional videographer's camera. It just wasn't. That was never the target audience. Having used this camera to actually shoot some of my vlogs, I can say it held up pretty well. And the autofocus was pretty sticky as well. Not obviously as good as more modern mirrorless cameras, but reliable. And the 1080p footage is absolutely fine for YouTube use. So if you're looking for a camera that's going to track you and reliably keep you in focus at all times while you're moving around the scene, this one's pretty spot on. Like I said, for YouTube stuff, it's absolutely fine. I wouldn't, however, be shooting a professional gig with this. I wouldn't be shooting anything high-end with this. That's not what it's aimed at, like I said before. It is just a good YouTube camera. Now, I have actually had a good amount of time to use this camera. It's been with us for a while now, and I've used it in a range of different scenarios, from landscape photography to shooting a party to shooting animals, shooting horse and riders recently. That was the most recent fun one I did with this particular camera, and it's handled all the situations fairly reasonably. One of the things I don't really hear talked about much at all with this camera, to be honest, is just how damn comfortable this is in the hand. The grip on this camera is actually really deep and well shaped. And Canon gets this right with a lot of their cameras, and if you're used to smaller cameras or maybe the mirrorless cameras, going back to one of these is actually quite refreshing. It just feels right in the hand, all the buttons are exactly where you need them, and everything just works. It's also slightly smaller than the 5D series of cameras, so if you've used one of those and you found it to be a little bit cumbersome in the hand, and you still want to shoot a DSLR from Canon that's full frame, this one might be the one to go for. It's a little bit smaller, a little bit lighter, a little bit more plasticky, yes, but they had to shave their weight somewhere. And yes, of course, because it's a Canon DSLR, it has access to lots and lots of first-party Canon lenses, and also, a bit of a sore topic here for RF users, third-party lenses for the EF mount from Tamron, Sigma, and the likes, Samyang, which all work perfectly on this camera. As you can probably tell in this video, I'm using the Tamron 24-70 f2.8 with VC, which is a absolutely outstanding lens on this camera, and they work together so well, and the images that come out of these two are so pleasing. It's a really great combination. The flippy dippy touchscreen. Now, I really like these. I know they're not everyone's cup of tea, and I know some people like the screens that just fold up or fold down, but I really like the fact the screen comes out to the side. It does help with YouTube videos, and it also helps getting lower or higher, or if I'm shooting Astro, I can just put the camera on the tripod and flip the screen to exactly where I need it. So for me, it's really good. The thing is, on this camera, it's not the highest resolution screen, but having said that, it is good enough. You can definitely still see the images and judge if it's actually come out well or not. Now, I'm predominantly a landscape photographer, so having a camera that can come out in all elements is kind of important. This camera is weather sealed. Now, we're going to use that loosely here. It's not as weather sealed as the 5D series, and definitely not as weather sealed as the 1D series. But Canon says it is still weather sealed, so there is still a level of protection there. Although I don't know with this particular camera how far I would push that, because quite frankly, I don't want to break the camera. Speaking about landscape photography, most of the time you're going to be using the screen at the back, the LCD. Now, this camera has Canon's highly coveted dual pixel autofocus, and it does actually focus using live view, whereas a lot of the older Canon DSLRs don't. They allow you to look at the image and they kind of focus, but it's not reliable. And this one has been kind of reliable. It depends on the situation. So if I'm out in the field or on a mountain and I use live view and I touch the screen to focus, I know it's going to nail the focus. I know it's going to get it most of the time reliably. And I know that if I have a slow moving subject in the frame, it's probably going to nail the focus with that too. I even used the live view at the party I shot because I wanted to be able to interact with the people a little bit more, and it allowed me to have the camera in front of me while also seeing them face to face and having the interactions that made everything a little bit less awkward. Now obviously with Canon's mirrorless cameras, they all use the back screen and they use it really well with their eye tracking and the face tracking and everything. This camera isn't quite there. Obviously it's an old iteration of that system, so don't expect it to be as good as the newer mirrorless cameras, because it just isn't. So if you're shooting something with a stopped down aperture, f2.8, f4, f5.6, this will probably nail focus. But if you're using a prime lens with, say, an f1.2, an f1.4, an f1.8 aperture, there's a very good chance it's going to miss focus, even though it's telling you on the back screen, yeah, I've got this, it's in focus, don't worry about it. Yeah, it's probably not. Like recently when we were shooting the horse and rider photo shoot workshop that we put together with the We Are Photo group, I was using the 85mm f1.4 at f1.4, and it kept telling me, yeah, this is in focus, mate, we got this is in focus. After reviewing a lot of the images, yeah, most of them weren't in focus. Now, all the ones I shot using the viewfinder, using the regular focus system that DSLRs are usually supposed to be used with, yeah, they're fine. They're all in focus. They're absolutely nailed. Those ones are the ones that came out and I actually used. But anything using the rear screen while I'm trying to video and photo at the same time with two separate cameras, any of those shots where it's telling me, yeah, I've got the focus. It didn't at all. Now, I know this isn't the camera's fault. You're not really supposed to use this camera like that, but, you know, I'm just trying to use the features that it had, and it wasn't that good. So that is something to keep in mind if you're using the rear screen to shoot a lot. It's not going to be that reliable at the wider apertures. I don't know if you can tell, but the strap is really annoying me in this video. Generally, I take the straps off my cameras, but my wife loves her strap on, so what can I say? As you can see in the video going on behind me talking, I'm currently shooting a sunset scene. It's quite a high dynamic range scene, and that's going to lead me on to the dynamic range of this camera, or lack thereof. Like I said in the beginning of the video, this camera got a lot of flack when it was released for having a low dynamic range. So much so that it even had a lower dynamic range than the 6D Mark I, its predecessor, the one it's supposed to replace. So you can kind of understand why on paper this got a lot of heat very quickly. If you're going to be underexposing and trying to recover the shadows, this camera is not the one for you. This camera does not do shadow recovery very well. It becomes a magenta horrible mess, and it handles it terribly. But, it does handle highlight recovery quite well. I kind of find that has been a thing with the Canon cameras I've had in the past too. They do tend to recover the highlights a lot better than they do shadows. So with this camera, I tend to expose to the right on the histogram a lot more, and that way I can get the shadows and the highlights in the raw file, and I'll be able to bring it back in post and have it all look as it should. Having said that, it still doesn't have as many stops as the Sonys or the Nikons, or even some crop sensor cameras like the 80D. So if you have a really high dynamic range scene, you probably are going to need to implement a filter system, or maybe even bracket the exposure to try and get everything exposed properly. Again, I've not actually come into too many circumstances where this has been a huge issue. Every now and then it crops up, but it's not been as bad as the reviewers made it seem like it would be when this camera was initially released. I was actually going to get this camera for myself a few years ago, but it was the YouTube reviewers and people online saying about the dynamic range and how it's really bad, and the fact I shot landscape photography kind of put me off getting this. But having used it now, it's totally fine. Like, there's no real issue with it. As long as you know your camera and you know how to handle and expose the scene properly, you'll get along fine with it. Now we're going to look at some shots I got while out on this walk, and some others I got at other times too. This shot actually had quite a high dynamic range in the photo. So the darks were very dark and the highlights are very, very bright. But you can see the camera managed to bring it back and control it quite well without the use of filters or bracketing. Likewise with this shot, the clouds were very bright, the ground was very dark. But again, it's controlled it quite well. The darks haven't gone mushy and the highlights haven't blown out. And I feel like the camera did a good job here. This wasn't a challenging shot, I just saw a rainbow and took a photo. You know, it's got to be done. Now this was a bit of a challenging shot. You can see the sun is setting behind the farmer's field. Now to get the highlights actually exposed properly and the foreground exposed properly is quite impressive, especially for a camera that's got a dynamic range of a potato. And here's a few shots from the horse and rider workshop that we put together. These are all using the Live View f1.4. As you can see, they're not incredibly sharp, but they're also not terrible, so it didn't do too bad. And just because, here's an old photo of me inside a fallen tree in the Peak District taken with the 6D Mark II. No real reason, just I'm in a tree. So, to conclude, the 6D Mark II. I quite like this camera. Obviously, it's not a professional's choice, but if you are an enthusiast or you're looking to go to your first full-frame camera, this one ticks a lot of boxes, and it's a fairly easy-to-use camera, and the menus are really nice and simply laid out too. And with the second-hand prices being as low as they are these days, this is kind of a steal on the second-hand market. So yeah, I give this one a thumbs up. This isn't a bad camera. It's got its quirks. No camera's perfect though, so yeah, I like it. Rock on. You do you, 6D.
Got my Canon in my hand. Feel the shudder of the land. Photos come alive so grand. Every story found unplanned. Lenses focused on your smile, freezing memory for a while. Every frame worth every trial. Walking down this photo aisle. Capture now and never miss all the moments full of bliss. Canon 60 takes the prize. Pictures clear, sunny skies. Click and shoot, no time to lose. Every moment, one to choose. Life in frames, so pure and true. Thanks to Canon 60 Mark.